About a decade ago, I was forced to shoot a fellow police officer in the line of duty. And you might be asking yourself, how does this happen? So if you follow along, I will do my best to break down the events to the best of my knowledge. But also the focus of this is not really the shooting, it's the aftermath for myself, the downward spiral, the alcoholism, and how I was able to actually recover from that. You know, after 4 combat deployments as an infantry Marine, I lost far more friends to their own hands than I did in combat. And I think I have found the key to stopping that, or at least helping a lot of people. And I want to share that after I share my story to kind of tell you how I got to that position and how I recovered from it. About 10 years ago, I was a brand new police officer. I was off probation about a month. And during that time, I actually took time off work because I had a newborn son and I got to spend a couple weeks with my wife and him and, you know, welcome him into this world. When I came back to work from that, I was in the lineup, the briefing before my first shift, and I was told about a SWAT team call out that had happened earlier in the month. And it was for a police officer in a neighboring jurisdiction who lived in my city. He had the SWAT team called out on him for mental health issues. He surrendered and they took him to the hospital for a temporary detention order. He was evaluated and then he was released. He would get intoxicated and call 911 after that. And he would threaten suicide, he would threaten homicide and a bunch of other stuff. Unbeknownst to me, because I am a brand new officer and I am not exposed to all the departmental drama that can happen, I did not know that this guy was dating a police officer, or was dating a police officer on our department, a female, who was still married to a former police officer from our department. So it's this crazy love triangle that I didn't know anything about it. I was just happy to be there. And so they split up and they started taking out all these cross felony warrants on each other and charging each other with like domestic assault, destruction of property. They were like slashing each other's tires. I don't even know how they managed to like stay police officers at this point, but they did. The other jurisdiction did not take this guy's firearms. They did not take his badge. They did not take his body armor. They took nothing. They just kind of put him on vacation and hoped the situation would resolve itself. So that night, I was asked to stay over and assist midnight shift. I worked the 2 p.m. to, I don't remember, 2 to 10, I think is what it was. And usually they needed a couple officers to stay over from 10 p.m. until midnight to help out, or 1 o'clock in the morning. So being a new officer, I needed all the overtime. We didn't get paid much, so I took all the overtime I could get. And so I stayed over to assist midnight shift. And I had gotten dispatched to transport a prisoner for some of our organized crimes detectives. And on my way there, I heard a call come across the radio for a suicidal subject armed with a gun. I listened to the location and I realized that I was quite literally right around the corner from it. So I had dispatch remove me from my assigned call and assign me to that call. I turned into the parking lot. It was a very large apartment complex. My supervisor beat me there, and he informed me this was the subject that they'd been having a lot of problems with. So he had already requested that there be a negotiator. We opened up lines of communication with him via cell phones, and we negotiated with him for nearly an hour, at which point we had more and more officers showing up because his threats were getting more and more violent. And about an hour into the negotiations with him, trying to get him to surrender peaceably, we're still at the entrance to this large apartment complex. There's probably, if I had to guess, between 300 and 500 units. I don't remember for sure how many. And he was way in the back. We were at the front. I remember hearing his voice come across the phone saying, "I went outside and looked for you and I don't see you. So I'm going to come and find you and kill you." I'm trying to push the other officers out to set up a perimeter at this point because I'm taking what he says at face value. I was also informed that he was either a former Navy SEAL or a SWCC. I don't know which. Frankly, being Tidewater, Virginia, it could have been any of those. There are a dime a dozen there. And so, this guy's got combat experience. He's a fellow combat veteran. He's also a police officer. He's been a police officer longer than I have. So, at this point, so I'm taking what he says very seriously. My supervisor decides to send a team around with the shield. I asked him twice to let me carry the shield. I've been shot at before, as an infantry Marine, and I know how to respond to incoming fire, and I have the intestinal fortitude to deal with it. And I asked to carry the shield because the officers behind me would be reliant on me to not lose my nerve, not drop the shield and whatever. I was told no, twice. They decided to give it to a brand new rookie instead. The guy was still in field training. They said that it would be a good learning experience for him. I disagreed, but I was overruled, and I was told to go maintain security on the opposite direction to make sure that he didn't sneak up behind us. At this point, we had like 14, 15 officers on scene. The team went around, and we had a team staged back by the vehicles to direct follow-on forces if necessary. The partner that I was assigned, him and I walked between, there's a big row of apartment complexes with a parking lot and then a fence. And we're over here at the entryway. I walk between two apartment buildings, and as we round the corner and I start to turn this direction, I encounter an individual wearing camouflage pants, a black t-shirt, a black rifle plate carrier with the words police on it in reflective and a badge. And he's carrying a rifle, muzzle down, hand on the pistol grip. And the first thought that went through my head was I remembered the call that I had been on, that there were our OCD, our organized crime guys, our plainclothes guys were out and about that night. So my first thought was they had hopped the fence because I was going right over there to where they were at to pick up a prisoner, and that they had decided to come and help us. And I remember being angry because I was like, why didn't you say something on the radio? Like, how stupid are you? And then the next thought was, well, it could be the guy that I was looking for. And all this happened, guys, in like, half of a second. It was super fast. We were at 10 yards initially when I encountered him. I decided that I was going to go ahead and point my shotgun at him. I had a Mossberg 590A1. It was my personal shotgun that I qualified with. And I was armed with a M&P 45 Gen 1. That was my sidearm. And I knew that I didn't have a weapon system that could defeat his body armor, so I was going to, be stuck with a pelvic girdle or a headshot. Well, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, it's pitch dark, the only light is behind me, it's illuminating him, but when I drop my sights to his pelvic girdle, my body creates a shadow and I couldn't see my sights anymore. We were not allowed to have optics or lights on our long guns because they were too militaristic. I wasn't comfortable trying to take a headshot on a moving target with apartments as my downrange area. So all of this happened in a split second. I chose to take the pelvic girdle shot. I can credit a lot of my survival that night to my training going through the Marine Corps CQB school. A lot of that stuff becomes second nature. I made the choice to take a pelvic girdle shot if necessary. I commanded him to drop the weapon and show me his hands. He ignored the first command. I repeated it. We're still closing the distance at this point. I'm sidestepping away from my partner in order to gain distance. And also I was trying to clear my downrange area and find a gap in the apartment buildings to where I wasn't shooting directly into an apartment. The second time I repeated the command, he said, "F you, is this what you want?" He brought the rifle up and launched it in my direction and immediately went for the handgun that he had tucked in his waistband. He had a 1911 tucked in his waistband. At which point I triggered a single shot from my 12 gauge shotgun. It was a slug, and I hit him. Well, I'm not entirely sure at this point where I hit him. He stopped and doubled over, and he yelled, "You shot me, a-hole." And I said, "Yes, if you don't get on the ground, you're going to get it again." He's holding his stomach down here in this area where the handgun was at, and he was still armed. He, at that point, collapsed and fell over and began screaming. Another officer showed up. We cut his armor off, disarmed him, and I began medical aid. I was ordered, at that point, I was identified as the officer that fired. I was ordered to leave the scene. I went and sat in my car and awaited further instructions, at which point I called my wife and told her that I was not going to make it home, that I had been involved in an officer-involved shooting, that I was okay. The other guy was not. When I stripped his armor off of him, I could see that my slug had clipped the bottom edge of his rifle plate and it had actually been stopped in soft armor. He was wearing a soft armor vest underneath his t-shirt, the same vest I was issued as a survival armor level 2. And it actually had stopped the slug at 7 yards. That's the downside probably to low recoil law enforcement slugs, the Hydra Shock ones from Federal. The level 2 vest actually stopped most of the slug. Part of it penetrated, and I was told they removed 8 or 10 feet of intestine, and he had a massive hematoma from it, soft tissue damage, swelling, And he survived the shooting. I gave my statement that night. I went home about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was told not to talk to anybody, that I couldn't leave the state, that I couldn't go on vacation, I couldn't do anything but sit in my house and wait to find out whether I was going to jail or whether I was going back to duty. So for about a month, I sat at my house, and nobody from the department was allowed to talk to me. I was not allowed to talk to anybody else. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I wasn't allowed to do anything, and I just had to sit there and wait. Rewinding a little bit, when I chose to point my weapon at him, I knew that I was taking a risk that I could be pointing my weapon at an actual fellow police officer that was just there to help. And I decided in that moment that I would take the hit later on if I had to answer for it. That was a pretty big mental block to overcome in a short amount of time. But after I gave my statement, I was back home and all of that. I sat there and waited. I actually got a phone call from one of my close friends. He wasn't supposed to be talking to me, but he said, "Hey, just so you know, that guy's out of prison or out of jail. I wanted to let you know because he's not real happy with you." They had released him, and because of all of they just dropped the ball on everything. They left him armed. They left him with his weapons. They left him with his badge of authority and everything else. There was so much incompetence and lack of communication between these two departments. They let this guy walk out of the hospital after being shot by a police officer about 2 weeks later. And he got involved in another high-speed pursuit in our jurisdiction. He was taking out more felony warrants, so he was just creating mayhem, him and his stupid girlfriend from our department. And from there, he was back out on the street and not even charged. And I'm sitting there going, what's happening to me then? Why am I still here? Well, they finally charge him. And he gets a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, and he's allowed to check himself into a VA hospital. He has made threats on my life and my family's life then, and a couple years later, when he got caught again with a gun and drugs and a bunch of other stuff, he made threats then. I was no longer a police officer at that point, and they called, one of my close friends called me just to let me know. But the department never actually reached out to warn me, to let me go take out a protective order or anything of the sort. All of this is what started my downward spiral. I began drinking heavily just to be able to sleep. The shooting itself isn't really what messed me up. It was the constant stress, the constant never knowing what was going to happen, watching my wife and my newborn son kind of, I wasn't able to connect. I was struggling, and I couldn't admit it. At this point, my ego had taken over. I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof. Infantry Marines tend to be kind of egotistical anyways, so I'm told. And once they become a police officer, they experience what I experienced, and they walk out the other side of it, seemingly unscathed. Well, you feel like you're untouchable. And that becomes a very difficult persona to keep up over time. I didn't really have anybody to talk to. I tried to talk to my spouse. I tried to talk to friends on the department over Jack and Cokes and, whatever. But again, that's not something that's going to help. And I just spiraled more and more and more. And I became probably the most toxic person that I know. I couldn't cope. And they moved me down into the most kinetic beat in the city after that. And the level of violence and depravity, the things that humans will do to each other, even here in America, I got to the point where I was numb to it. But I lived for the violence. I lived for the test, the adrenaline, the life and death decisions, and I didn't care about anything else at the job. And I didn't care about anything else at home. I gave my best at work, and my family got the worst of it. And I say all that to try and explain where I was at. I know that a lot of my friends that died by their own hand were probably at or near that same position, and they didn't know how to get out of it. And life looks really dark when you're at that spot and there's no way out. But I'm here to tell you, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There might be a bend in the tunnel where you can't see it, but the light's there. There is hope. So about 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago maybe at this point, I got sober. I quit drinking. And there was an episode on the Sean Ryan show. He had that Delta dude. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He had a Delta guy on there. And the guy was talking about after he went into the hotel and shot it out with a bunch of terrorists and stuff, how when he came back home, it took about 2 years to quit drinking. And when it did, these emotions started coming out sideways and he couldn't understand what was happening. And so drinking suppresses those emotions that you're crushing down. It makes you numb. It makes it to where you can sleep, sort of, but not well. But it takes about 2 years after you stop doing that. And man, 2 years to the day, I started having just stuff kept coming up, like memories. And I started I was crying, I was angry, but I was talking about it. And it was baby steps, but I remember distinctly one day sitting in my living room and I saw this box in my head. It said Marines on it, and it was like a toy box almost, like I had as a child, where all my toys went in. You know, like you clean your room as a kid, you throw the toys in the toy box, and you like cram the lid shut, and then your room's clean, right? But it's not really, because that toy box is just hiding everything. And this is what was in my mind. It was a box, and it said Marines, and I opened the lid, and it was filled with like these really crappy memories, these traumatic experiences from the Marine Corps. And I'd have to pick one of them up, and I'd have to look at it. And I'd have to examine it. I remember turning it all around, just remembering every aspect, the sights, the smells, the sounds, and crying about it, being angry about it, feeling the emotions that I didn't let myself have. And once I was done, I'm like, now what do I do with it? And I looked up, and in my mind, there was a shelf there. And I had to take that, and I had to put it on the shelf like a trophy, you know? And it was like a symbol of the pain that I had experienced, you know, whatever. And I didn't really know what it meant at the time. But what I realized is once that went up on the shelf, I couldn't take it back. It just kind of faded. It was still there. It's still there to this day. But it's like a trophy from like middle school. It doesn't mean anything to you anymore, really. It's just like, oh yeah, there's that. You know, it's whatever. And after about a year, I worked through that box. It took a lot of prayer. It took a lot of giving it to God. It took a lot of crying. It took a lot of processing. But on the other side of it, I was a different person. And when I was done with it, man, I felt like there was a day I reached in the box and there was nothing there. And I look into this box again. All of this is in my mind. I'm able to shut the lid. And that box disappeared. And right behind it was a dumpster-sized box that said police. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. And then I remembered how I dealt with the box from the Marine Corps. It seemed overwhelming at the time, but it's just one memory at a time. And I can tell you, it only took about 2 weeks to get through that box of police memories because I knew what to do. I went after that like it was my job. Every time one of these memories would pop into my head, I would stop, I would examine it, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do with this? Where does this fit on my shelf? You know, sometimes I had to laugh about it. Like, it wasn't all serious. It was like, this memory, I was like, yeah, this is really traumatic and really, really jacked up, but man, it was funny. But I take those, they're still traumatic. You develop a dark sense of humor as a coping mechanism. And you'll never lose that, I don't think. But you take those memories and you put them on the shelf. And when that box was done, I was a completely different person. I had a much closer walk with God at that point. But I also had a much better way of communicating with my wife. And I was a much calmer person. And life was just a lot better. And it's been an uphill, parabolic, just ever since then. So I guess if I had to sum it up, what would I tell Luke 10 years ago? I'm turning, I think, 38 this year, so I would have been 27, turning 28 then. What would I tell 27, 28-year-old Luke that just had to shoot a fellow police officer? I would tell Luke that it's okay, that you did what you had to do, that you didn't have a choice, and he made choices and forced you to make choices. And you can't control how many friends he had on your department and how they went behind your back to feed him information about you and absolutely sabotage you. You don't have to stay a police officer. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence. You didn't have to go another 3 years after that, killing yourself for nothing. I would also say that the sooner that you can deal with it and find somebody to talk to, don't dump it on your spouse. Don't talk to people at work about it. Go find somebody that can understand. It can be a trauma counselor, a grief counselor, a pastor. It doesn't matter. Find somebody you can talk to that can help you. And don't give up. Keep pushing. Keep trying. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The last thing I would say is that the key for me was becoming a Christian and developing a relationship with God. The more I sought him, the more I read his word, the more I began to understand him. The more I began to understand It wasn't like I was taught as a child. That's not the Christ that I follow. The man specializes in trauma. He took every bit of trauma for everybody that will ever exist in this world on himself. He understands you better than you understand yourself. And he understands what you're going through. You can give it to him. You can take those experiences and go, God, here they are. I don't know what to do with these. Please help me. Without that, I can't say that I would have recovered. Without that, I can't say that I would have gotten sober. I had to get sober first to make this happen. But God was there through all of it. I hope this story helps somebody. Thank you.